In this video, we're going to discuss how to perform a technique known as data imputation. And this technique is utilized when we have data that is missing from a variable or variables. And as we talked about previously, there are several different ways we can replace missing data. One potentially being replacing with the mean of the group of that variable of data that is present. If this was a post-test, we could do the last value carried forward. But in this case, we're going to do something called imputation. And how this works is the software creates a regression equation that predicts what the value would be in the missing space based upon responses in other variables. So it looks at what the responses or the values were in variables A, B, C, and D, for example, and then it uses those values to predict what the value in E would be, variable number E. So that's how it works. So it's fairly straightforward, and it's becoming a fairly well accepted technique for replacing missing data that deals with some of the cons that we have with last value carried forward or replacing with the group mean. But the caveat here is we want to make sure that when we do this, we're not doing it for large amounts of missing data. So typically, if we have more than 5 to 10% missing data, that usually indicates the data might not be missing at random. And so when we do multiple imputation, the assumption is typically the data we're replacing is missing for a random reason. There's no systematic reason the data is missing. But when we have large amounts of data that it might be missing, that tends to indicate that there might not be a random reason. There might be an actual systematic reason data is missing. And this could then create some bias. So if we've got less than 5% data missing and we want to replace that missing data with actual data, then typically multiple imputation will be safe. And this is usually done when we've got intention to treat analysis that we want to perform. So we want to actually replace the missing data so we can get a full data set for that particular variable that we're interested in. So we're gonna go ahead and do this in the demonstration for one variable that might be missing. So when we go to our management menu here, you'll see the indication of imputation. So we're going to click on that. And what it asks us to do is click on the variable that we want to replace missing data in, and it's going to list the variables that have missing data for us. And so in this case, we want to replace variables from the glucose variable. Now we can do this for all the variables that have missing data, or we can just do it with a single variable. It's your choice. Now we have two options here as to what happens with the new data that we've included. We can either replace the variable that's already there, and then what this basically does is replace the missing data in the variable, doesn't really change anything else, doesn't create a new variable. We can also have the option of creating a new variable. So the old variable that had the missing data is left alone, and then we create a new variable with the old data and the new imputed data. It's probably best practice in most cases to create a new variable that has the imputed data, because very often what we might do is compare the descriptive statistics for the imputed variable versus the old variable to make sure that we haven't radically changed that variable. And also we sometimes do comparisons, group comparisons for the non-imputed variable and then compare it to the imputed variable. So we're going to go ahead and choose the creation of a new variable that has the new imputed data. And so we've got our glucose variable checked, and we basically then click submit. And so what we'll see is if we scroll all the way over to the right, we'll see this new variable that's been created, glucose, and it'll have the little indication imputed. So this is the variable that has the old data, but now it has the new imputed values. And you usually be able to recognize the imputed values because they're going to have decimal points, they're going to have fractions. So this now allows us to take a variable that had missing data, and it allows us to replace that data in a way that is much more systematic and probably much more accurate than just replacing with the group mean or last value carried forward. So that's how the imputation works. And again, it's a good idea to make sure we're keeping track of how many variables we impute We want to report that in our methods section. As we do our regular data screening, as we look for accuracy, completeness, and normality. If we find that we do not have complete data sets, we want to report in our method section how many missing data points there were, the fact that we used multiple regression imputation to replace those, and then we'll often report the mean of the original data as well as the mean of the imputed data so that our readers can see that and understand how that may have changed the variable. So hopefully you'll find this technique useful, and good luck using it in your own research.